your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
To Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to dive into something to deal with capitalism, but in reality it has to deal with crony capitalism or corporatism. It's a collusion between big business and government, because you know that you have all these reports about, economy is just doing great, the stock market's doing great, and really what that signals is big business isn't doing bad. But it really doesn't touch on the issue. Now the economy has gotten better, but not at the rate that the stock market is bouncing up. Not at the rate that big business is able to continue to profit, even in the worst of times. And that has to do with collusion between big business and government. And I've talked about it before, how most bills that are passed to, protect the consumer protection, it tends to always be, it's not consumer protection, it's big business protection. Well, it's because it's usually written by big business. So they're going to put rules and regulations that prevent others from competing. And one example I've used before is the Rockefellers and Standard Oil. First, Rockefeller used government to gain the wealth he was able, get property and push other people out of the way. He was able to collude with government to have that ability. A lot of people point to Trump and using eminent domain and all that. Basically same thing. And then after it really became just public knowledge and outraged people, monopolies. He again colluded with government to put, a anti-monopoly measure in place, and broke up Standard Oil. And people are like, break up that monopoly. But what they didn't know is, Rockefeller would hold majority stake in almost all the companies that came out of Standard Oil. He kept his monopoly, at the same time preventing others from creating that monopoly. And it would be harder for others because they would have to buy into every single outfit and hold, majority stock, which would be almost impossible. He knew how to make moves and collude with government. He was a corporatist, a very talented manipulator. And this has continued to go on with some of the major companies. And you also see the government also, solicit those companies too. Look at how government solicits social media companies to be the policeman or to give up information on people, be the data collector. And that basically also kind of shows the moral, the moral standards of the people that are running. And, there are, tech startups that literally, shut everything down instead of colluding with government. They rather throw it away because they had morals. What we need to do is support that and also stand against government and the companies having that power. And no matter what side you might stand on, actually being able to post the bills way ahead of time before a vote would allow people to go and look at it firsthand and then, show their support or don't show their support, show their anger against something like that. And I guarantee you a lot less bills would get passed if people read it way ahead of time. But I want to dive in this Ron Paul Liberty report, why so many big businesses love government regulations.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today as co-host is Chris Rosini. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Great to be with you.
Very good, and we want to talk a little bit today about the relationship of big business. They tend to make a lot of money very often. Relationship to government, and is it because government protects the free market, or is it the fact that maybe big business is in the business of protecting their interests? And, of course, there are a few people, I'm sure, that can make money in the free market. But what we're talking about are the very, very big industries and big businesses, the ones that are closely related to government one way or another, getting subsidies or benefits or whatever. And there is a relationship, and this is an issue which is very political right now when you think about this tax changes going on or trying to go on in Washington, D.C. This is a big issue because there's such a discrepancy in wealth distribution, enough where everybody should be concerned about it. Even we who believe in big business, if it's honest, and free markets, we have to be concerned about what's happening. I've repeated this before, but I'm still astounded by the fact that the wealth that the lower 50% hold is equivalent to 3 of our richest people. It does not mean that we should automatically resent people who have a lot of money, but it makes us want to look and find out how they make the money and whether it had something to do with undermining the middle class and benefiting the very wealthy class. And for some reason, I'm strongly suspicious of that since I've complained about it. And of course, Mises, the great Austrian economist, made it very clear in Human Action that if you embark on a so-called compromise, which is interventionism, between the market and government in socialism, you eventually will destroy the middle class, and it will drift toward and maybe eventually turn into fascism. And there's a lot of talk about that going on today. So Chris, I'm sure you've had some thoughts about this because obviously there's some real inequities there, and the relationship between big government and big business is very crucial in understanding how to find some solutions to our problems.
Yes, there are so many myths that surround this, especially for people that are new, that are growing up, and they're, what's a Republican, what's a Democrat, and they want to know what's going on. And it's just a big ball of myths that you're fed right from the beginning. And it starts with the thought that, well, businesses, they love free markets, and they're just hobbled by these politicians who hate free markets, and that Republicans are for limited government, and they're going to free things up so everybody. But it's all a myth. They're all against free markets because businesses, going back, if we talk about Republicans going all the way back to Lincoln and the founding of the party, they were founded on corporate welfare. Internal improvements is what they called them. And what that was is basically government favors for business, favoring one over another. And it's the worst end up rising to the top once government starts tilting the tables in one direction versus another.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It did start early on. Matter of fact, if you go back all the way to Hamilton, he was on the side of financing industry in a minor way compared to today. But we see now that individuals still are confused about all of this. You know, after the Civil War and during that Civil War period, we had the scandals going on with the railroads. And they said that was too much capitalism. But when you look into that, we find out that there was a lot of corruption there and a lot of gifts that still cause confusion today because of these tremendous land grants for the railroads. And the real tragedy back then, it was failing at the very beginning. Most of those railroads failed. They went bankrupt. And the one or two that did it on their own and bought up the property on their own, they were more efficient. But this mixture is a bad mixture. And right now we do hear this a lot of talk about fascism. And I think that's realistic because there's so much emphasis on the use of government. But I'm also fascinated with how did we get here? Did all of a sudden the big business decide that they're going to lobby for their special interests? Where did the principles come from? Do they just say, we want to make more money and the people cave in? A little bit of that might have existed early on where business was the sole influencer. But in the 20th century, the real disintegration of the market and the enhancement of corporations came by the left because they pretended to be, for the poor, and they thought some of them actually thought their bleeding hearts would take care of the poor. But the principle was that when somebody wanted something or needed something or demanded something, it was a right to have it, and they played on the poor need it, the poor need it. So once the welfare system and the principles of welfarism and transfer of wealth was established, guess what? The very wealthy, the business people, used that principle. Sure, we'll let the people have a house here and now and then, and we'll give them some food stamps, but all the big bucks really go, to the large corporations, and then the poor get poorer and poorer. The left, I keep wondering, why does the left stick with that principle? Because I think so many of them are sincere, but it always fails. The more they have intervention and spending and debt, the principle stays alive with big business and big banks. At the same time, the middle class gets wiped out. So I think we have to look at this philosophically if we're ever going to solve the problem, and we're going to have a chance to do something about it because this system can't last because it's run on perpetual debt and perpetual interference by our government in everything that we do.
Yes, and where a lot of things go wrong and that people have been tricked into thinking is that government regulations are anti-big business, but it's just not true. I mean, we here at the Ron Paul Liberty Report, they're not breaking down our doors saying, government is killing us. We need your free market ideas. That's not the case. Big business loves government regulations because they use it to protect themselves from competition, from upstarts. These big shot CEOs, they live glamorous lives, and in a free market that could disappear overnight with consumers choosing a competitor. So they create this government moat around themselves, and it's used to their benefit. Government regulations are not anti-big business. They're often written by big business lobbyists. So, these are big misconceptions, but a lot of people believe the opposite.
And a lot of people have a simplistic answer to this. You mentioned the lobbyists, and we all talk about them, and they are a big part of the problem. But not too many people talk about the definition and the following of the rules of what should the role of government be. And the rule, of course, should be what the Constitution says, and it should be very separate, and the government should be very small. So they don't deal with that. They're not dealing with the role of government when they're dealing with spending and taxes in Washington, and they're talking about who's going to get the benefits. At the same time, they're talking about things being revenue neutral. They have no intention on cutting anything. But the move on, there is a move to concentrate only on the lobbyists. It's all the lobbyists' fault. Well, they're the vehicle, but they're not at fault because a lobbyist, as far as I'm concerned, is a petitioner. He goes and he petitions his government. They can petition for good things or bad things. They could petition for freedom or they can petition for these benefits. So the problem is the role of government has been so abused that people can, I believe, constitutionally petition the government. But some people say, oh, no, what we have to do is regulate the lobbyists. Same way with elections. It's the fact there's too much money in elections. Of course there's too much money, but they're just bidding, for the stolen goods. They want to go and get what they can. So it's natural. But once again, it's because we don't restrain the government. The rules don't apply to the government. And if you and I want to spend some of our money to lobby, for gun rights or right to life or whatever, and less government and lower taxes, we should have a right to do it. And we should be regulated and say, no, you can't do this. In a way, we're getting some of that when you see what the IRS was doing. The IRS was coming, under Obama and attacking us who were advocating the free market. So no, you don't want to. I believe it's a wrong step if you want to regulate and tell lobbyists what they can do with their money, or the people who want to spend their money on supporting candidates. The real problem is the morality of the people that end up in Washington. This problem could be restored if we actually had people that believed in what they say when they get elected, that they take the oath of office and work to reduce the size and scope of government.
Those are all excellent points, Dr. Paul. And it's important to point out that this is not just a big business thing. Politicians are the other side of the coin. They're not angels sitting there. They love the attention. They love corporations bidding for their attention. I mean, just look at politicians with all the pomp and circumstance. They love that. They like to feel important, and they like to bully people around too with laws. So the more laws they pass, the greater high they get. So this is not just a big business taking advantage of politicians. Absolutely not. In a free market, politicians would have none of this to hand out. There's no one to favor. You're there to prosecute fraud and abuse and aggression. That's it. But they don't want that either. They like this kind of attention and being able to dole out favors to people.
And the support and the people who push this type of program is a collusion between big business and government. You take the bureaucracies that have been created. You don't have big business over here and government over here. The bureaucracies are part of big government. If you take, the banking industry, they're very much involved in writing banking regulation. So they're part of the government. They're pseudo-government. They deal with the Fed. At the same time, they're business people, too, that are supposed to be private, and they work together. But what about the bureaucracies in government? If you look at the bureaucracies involving in the distribution of medical care, and that's where all the expenses have gone. not all of it. A lot of it goes to the bureaucracy itself, but then a lot of it goes to the business people, the insurance companies and the drug companies, everybody else. So the bureaucracies want to protect their jobs. We're not going to see any significant reduction as we clean the swamp of the eradication of a lot of people in Washington. Those jobs are going to be there. And when it comes to the military, they're going to expand. And you have so many of these. We have the banking industry. We have the medical industry. We have the education industry and the military industrial complex. How about agriculture? You can't do anything against the farmers. And yet farmers are hardworking people that I think if they were allowed to live in a free market, they would adapt rather quickly. I think everybody would. But right now, the name of the game is collusion with big government at the expense of the middle class, at the expense of the dollar. And once again, and we've talked about this before, and that is the collusion with the central bank, the Federal Reserve, with all these expenditures that it's financed by debt and by monetizing debt, which services the banks and all the special interests. So the bleeding hearts say, well, I'm going to give you everything for free medical care and free food and the whole works, free housing, and this will take care of it. But the debt then is monetized. Guess who suffers? Well, the downturns come, the people lose their jobs, and then the prices go up. And even in spite of the government's announcements there's no inflation, everybody knows there's a lot of inflation, destroying the middle class for which the moral standards were set. We want to do this to help the middle class. So even the conservatives are talking about, well, we got to rein in the business community and we have to take care of the middle class and all this. And yet at the same time, do they talk much about doing something with the Federal Reserve? There was a time when we thought the new administration would be on our side on auditing the Fed. Maybe auditing the Pentagon might be a pretty good idea, too, when you think of how much corruption there is there, both in the bureaucracy in the government, plus all the money and the people who make money in the industry. So it's very complex. I don't think all of a sudden we're going to get those moral individuals in Washington that become a majority and wean us off this. It's never happened in history. But I do think it's worthwhile putting out this effort that we put out to try to prepare people and set a standard and tell the people what we can replace it with, because that opportunity is coming, and that's where I lean more toward the optimism. Not about this week or next week what they're going to do with the tax bill. I'm not very optimistic about that, and I'm not optimistic on the short run that our liberties are going to be preserved and we're going to have more privacy. We have some big problems ahead, but the time is coming where this will fail just as the Soviet communist system failed, which was almost a miracle the way that came apart. So there's a lot we can do to prepare the way and try to explain this, and this is the reason we wanted today to talk about this collusion between big business and try to remove some of these myths, which Chris has done such a good job in explaining.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Paul. And I'll close with a short statement saying that, free markets, actual freedom has very few champions. We are the minority. Now, that's not a bad thing because big things usually start with minorities. But today, we're always told that we have a free market capitalist system, but that is not true at all. There are pockets of free markets, thank God. But overall, we live in a government-managed economy from top down. And when things go south, and they do, we can always expect university professors, the media, schools, even the businessmen to say it's the free market's fault. It's a free market's fault. And that's where the power of our ideas have to really shine, so that maybe someday there will be a free market once again in America.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. We have to distinguish between true free markets and crony capitalism. And that's a job in itself because most people want to blame free markets. But the lies continue. They get into power by lying and innuendos and misinformation and a bad education. Then they have to stay in power by doing the same things. And the people in this country, though, I think are waking up. Not to the point where tomorrow we're going to have a reversal, but there's some good news. One is in the educational sphere that I talk about. there's a lot better understanding about what free markets and sound money is all about and what we ought to do. But the other thing that is encouraging is if you go out and do a poll and find out, and not a slanted poll and a biased poll, and before the propagandists go out there to do it, is that the people are not trusting the government as well as they used to. It used to be, oh yeah, whatever you need, they'll pay for it, and it's automatic, and either side would take care of it, and there was great bipartisan there. Now, the American people don't believe what the government tells them, and I think that's healthy. And when there's a crisis or somebody gets killed or an assassination or a crisis like 9/11, set up a commission, the government. The government will explore this, explain to the people what has happened, and find out if there was any failure on the part of our government. But most people now don't even believe the commission. They might ask for another commission in hopes that they'll be more honest in finding out the answers. And right under today's conditions, I'm not so satisfied that would happen. It's sort of like, well, we have one special prosecutor, another one might clean up the mess. It's not likely to. But the fact that the people are questioning this and not believing the government, and also that the answers are out there, I think should be very encouraging. So I want to remain optimistic. Some days it's not as easy, but still, ideas have consequences, and I think when an idea whose time has come, we can prevail. And what we hear on the surface and what we hear in the media and from Washington is a little less relevant than some people think. Chris, I want to thank you very much for being with us today on the Liberty Report.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul.
And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. I'm having a problem pulling up this article here. But, he said something there at the end about, distrust in the government is growing. The problem is we still have... definitely in the younger age groups, we have quite a bit that they don't trust government now, but they believe that they can have a government that's big and protect them. Which we know that not to actually be true. Bigger you make the government, that the worse off the people tend to be. Now, he was pointing out something I think that's very important, and it's the fact that a lot of people will go after the lobbyists or the people lobbying, meaning the companies, and that's one of the big flaws. It's allowing government to be able to make these type of deals, to be able to pass bills that actually only bolster big business over any competition, or very little competition. The only competition they're going to get is from the other people that are wealthy, because they've also made regulations to protect their other investments. This article will pop up. Jeez. Okay. Now, one thing that was a pretty interesting article I came across here was from The Hill. Unemployment rate hit record low in 13 states this year. And this is something that is a good thing, as long as people are able to take these jobs not only provide for themselves, but be able to have something to possibly invest in, maybe creating their own business, their own, to become entrepreneurs, to really, search what they can do rather than just the same assembly line. Everybody, works at these assembly lines, because we do have, fields that require a lot of labor, but if prices went up, it would put a shock on the system. It just would. And if you really want to do it in a way that prevents that shock, it has to come from companies willing to not even go crazy, but invest a little bit more in their labor, so people at least have the opportunity. Not saying everybody's going to take that opportunity. We know that not to be true. But, if it's all minimum wage jobs, we probably wouldn't benefit. So let's go ahead and get into this article. 13 states this year have seen their unemployment rates drop to the lowest levels ever recorded since the federal government began keeping track of state-level data more than 4 decades ago. 8 years after the bottom of the worst recession in modern history, the states seeing economic booms range from the bluest of the blue, like Hawaii and California, to the deepest shades of red, like Idaho and Texas. Texas has always been a real good economy, mainly because they can be self-reliant within that, the state of Texas. It says here in October, the unemployment rates in Alabama, Hawaii, Maine, Mississippi, Tennessee, Texas, Washington all met or beat their lowest rates ever recorded by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. According to the agency's monthly report issued Friday, California, Colorado, Idaho, North Dakota, and Oregon also hit new lows earlier this year. In 2010, during the depths of the Great Recession, 6 states, California, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Nevada, and North Carolina, notched record high unemployment rates. Oregon, Rhode Island, and Kansas City set their own record highs in 2009. Nationally, the unemployment rate sits at 4.1%, the lowest level since December 2000, when it hit 3.9%. 13 states have unemployment rates significantly below the national rate, while 15 states have rates significantly above it. Now, I want to point out something, though, too, that, how many people are not looking for a job? We had this same discussion under Obama, so you can't just throw it aside because it's now Trump in charge. So, a lot of these rates partially drop off because people stop looking for jobs, stop filing for unemployment. I know people that actually quit job and became more of a stay-at-home parent, because, one job was able to prosper even though we were in a recession, while the other person, basically their job stalled out. It became a burden. It became a better situation to be at home parent. So you have all that to put into place too, and all these factors. But the rate that it's dropping off also does signify people are willing to start hiring again. So it's a startup of the economy. How long will it last? Will it actually fully, become a rolling economy again? We'll have to wait and see. But it says here, Hawaii boasts the lowest unemployment rate in the nation at just 2.2% in October, followed by North Dakota at 2.5%. and Colorado, Nebraska, and New Hampshire at 2.7 each. I want to point out Hawaii still has a very, very, very bad homeless problem that hasn't really gotten too much better. So, are these people considered in the unemployment rate in Hawaii? Because I know for a fact that it's a real big, they got full encampments of homeless people that are constantly getting raped by the cops. It says here, Alaska's unemployment rate, 7.2%, remains the highest in the nation, followed by the District of Columbia at 6.6% and New Mexico at 6.1%. I wonder if Alaska, they include Native Americans in that area. That'd be interesting to know. We know in a lot of reserves, drug and alcohol problem is still persistent. A lot of them get some type of government assistance. I really think government should allow the reserves to govern themselves and stay out of it. Treat them as the nations that they are. But it says here in the last year, Alabama's unemployment rate has plunged the most, 2.5% points. BLS reported Tennessee's unemployment rate has dropped 2% percentage points from 5% to 3%. Only two states, Alaska and South Dakota, and the District of Columbia, have seen their unemployment rates rise in the last 12 months. And that was from The Hill. So we have, a little to look up to. I think it can get better. I do think we need a tax cut. We have the House passed the $1.5 trillion tax cut. 13 Republicans voted no. There's a showdown in the Senate right now. And really, there's a lot of misinformation on both sides going out, absolute lies going out about what the tax bill entails from both sides. You have the left, out there just trying to make it look like, something the devil wrote. It's not what they're claiming it to be, but it's also not what the Republicans are claiming it to be. I think there are some good things in it. I think there's some bad things in it. And I think when it comes to Trump, I think he wants to get a tax cut passed. He's going to pass whatever they're willing to pass because he needs it. And he knows it'll be better than nothing. But I still have issues when tax plans set up the ability for others to add more corruption, just like the crony capitalism, the corporatism that goes on, and the collusion between big business and government. But we definitely need a tax cut. And what the left is afraid of is, they're going to lose some of their leverage because they like giving people stuff to keep them on the ticket. But then they also know if they do lose this, that, that'll be a selling point for my next election. They really don't care. Because either way they're going to play it. But they got to keep the facade going. They got to go on camera and just hammer on it and make lies and not really care about it. Not care about the truth. Because they have to keep up that act that they care. Okay. I want to get to this one here. We'll get into some of these new allegations. I have one here from Stefan Molyneux and Al Franken, sexual assault accusations. And if you go to Drudge Report right now, first, thing you see at the top is a picture of Al Franken on SNL, doing the gesture with the finger and making a hole and putting his finger through that hole. Yeah. There's a lot of reports that, this was his kind of character when he was, back then when he was on Saturday Night Live and doing the comedy bits and all that. So, I don't think it was a big secret, but I think it was something people kind of just didn't talk about because they don't want him to look bad. He's on their side. Couldn't believe Ben Affleck all over, morning news. Ben Affleck, the guy that has been accused of groping, they're now treating like, oh, he's forgiven. He's speaking out against it. Oh yeah, and he has another, Batman movie coming out. Double standard maybe? Something the left does. If this was something that was just coming out of the seams on the right, even though you got, the Judge Roy Moore thing, but I'm saying that if this was a big thing, right now it's a big thing in Hollywood, coming from a lot of people that support the left, that are involved with the left. And if it was vice versa, they would want these people on a stake because it's the right. There'd be riots in the streets over it. But because it's not, it's the left, and the left controls the media, they want to try to, let's let our friend Ben Affleck look a little bit better in the public eye. We'll make, excuses and, just forgive, and, he's not as bad as, other people. Or no one's as bad as other people, and some people are worse than other people. What point are you trying to make that you're making excuses for him while others are not having excuses made for them? You're not going to give Roy Moore any type of leeway, but you'll give your side leeway. Double standard. Let's get into this.
I want you to think of a stereotypical hanging Chad frat boy named Biff. Now, Biff goes to a party, and at the party, a woman falls asleep, and he grabs and gropes at her breasts. Now, a picture is taken of Biff and is sent to the university administrators. Now, how long in nanoseconds do you think it would be before that Biff guy is forcibly ejected from the university? I'm going to guess 0. Why? Because he'd realized which way the wind was going to blow, where he was going to end up. He'd saw off his own testicles, hand them to the administrators in a Dungeons & Dragons dice bag, and then retire to a monastery in Tibet for the rest of his natural-born existence. Why are we talking about Biff? Well, because there's a woman talking about Al Franken. Al Franken. And there's a picture which you can look for. I'm not going to reproduce it here. So, this is what she says. In December 2006, I embarked on my 9th USO tour to entertain our troops, my 8th to the Middle East since the 9/11 attacks. My father served in Vietnam, and my then boyfriend and now husband Chris is a pilot in the Air Force, so bringing a little piece of home to service members stationed far away from their families was both my passion and my privilege. So, she's doing charitable work. This is exhausting stuff. It's like a day and a half to fly there. You're there for weeks. It's night, morning, noon, and night in terms of meeting and greeting and doing shows and so on. Now, she is extraordinarily hot, although, very smart as well, alongside with being very smart. She's a reporter, she's a journalist, and so on. And so she was there to be the MC, introduce Max. But I guess Al Franken, with his squinty, half-hobbit, shaggy-haired, 55-year-old married guy, gross, cap-of-the-knee leer, saw her and said, hey, man, I've written some skits for us. You should do a skit with me. And she's like, well, okay. Why don't you show me the script? So he shows her the script. And in the script, he gets to really kiss her. Now, she, of course, is like, this is a woman who's used to being hit on. And she's like, well, I'm pretty sure I know what he's really after. But, in the skit, I'll turn my cheek, I'll cover my mouth, it'll be kind of funny. So this is what she agrees to do. Now, on the day of the show, Al Franken and this woman are alone backstage. They're going over the lines one last time. And he says, we need to rehearse the kiss. And she laughs and just kind of ignores him. And he says it again. And she says something like, relax, Al, this isn't SNL. We don't need to rehearse the kiss. But he's like continuing to insist. And, it's kind of making her a little uncomfortable. And he's like, oh, no, actors really need to rehearse everything. We got to practice this kiss. And finally she's like, okay. So they did the lines leading up to the kiss. And then Al Franken, I guess, goes tippy-toe, comes at her, puts his hand on the back of her neck, mashes his lips against hers, and aggressively sticks his tongue in her mouth. Now, if you're kissing someone you love, I'm sure that's fine. Some people really like that. But playing tonsil hockey with someone you don't really have that relationship with at all, when you're married and she has a boyfriend, is really, really gross. Imagine some homeless guy reeking of rat hair and foul alcohol jamming his tongue in your mouth and licking your teeth. This is what it is like, I'm sure, in this context. Now, listen, I spent some time on the stage. I went to theater school, and you don't do it for real. If you're having a fist fight, you don't actually punch someone. If you're doing a sword fight, you don't actually hit him with a sword. I remember playing Macbeth. Big sword fight that I was in. The sword got stuck in the wall. I couldn't pull it out. I had to leap on the guy and pretend to choke him to death. I didn't choke him to death. If you're kissing someone on stage, you don't use tongue. You don't do that really gross saliva waterfall that Tom Cruise did in Top Gun, because it's a play. They're far away. You don't do it. It's a violation. Now, this woman pushes Franken away with both of her hands and says, if you ever do that to me again, I will not be so nice about it the next time. And then, other than what they have to do on stage, and she keeps turning her head away and covering her mouth when he tries to kiss her, she never had any kind of conversation with Franken again. She avoided him, made sure she was never alone with him. Predator in the house, ladies. Now, what does he do? How does he take this rejection of, frankly, inevitability? Well, petty insults. He drew devil horns on at least one of the headshots that she's autographing for the troops. Just really, really gross stuff like that. Now, the tour ends. Christmas Eve, they begin the 36-hour trip home to L.A. Now, just, Christmas Eve, 36-hour trip. This woman is giving up Christmas at home with her family in order to do this charitable work. This is after 2 weeks of, night and day travel, performing, pressing the flesh, taking photos, selfies, and all that kind of stuff. So she's exhausted. So the C-17 cargo plane takes off from the soil on Afghanistan, and she falls asleep. Now, she's still wearing her flak vest and Kevlar helmet, and she makes it home. Now, later, she's in the States, and she's looking through the CD of the photos that are handed by the photographer who was documenting the trip, and she saw the photo. And the photo is of Uncle Spanky Fingers, grabby hands, knee-high to a pervert, Al Franken, doing a big grin in the camera and grabbing at her boobs. And she says, I couldn't believe it. He groped me without my consent while I was asleep. I felt violated all over again, embarrassed, belittled, humiliated. How dare anyone grab my breast like this and think it's funny? Now, she told her husband everything that happened, showed him the picture, and just imagine. So this is 2006. He doesn't become senator till 2008. Obamacare, remember? And imagine having this much power, being on the left, being a comic. Imagine having this much power that you have no concerns about a woman you've groped while she's sleeping having a picture of it. He's smiling for the camera. He knows the picture has been taken. This is what the Democrats have festered and become lazy and Jabba the Huttish and muscleless in, having this kind of power. Because imagine, this picture's out there. He didn't say, oh man, you got to delete that picture. That's really incriminating. This is some bad stuff. No, he's like, meh, meh, meh. Like this cross between a retard Benny Hill and a proctologist. Imagine, because if she goes to the media, this is Al Franken. He's on the left. He's powerful. If she goes to the media will be like, oh, we're not publishing that. Forget it. We don't care. And this is before this alternative media, otherwise known as the factual media, zero fucks given media, tell the truth media. Guess back in 2006, I guess I was just starting out. In 2006, and my voice was a lot less hoarse back then because the world wasn't pissing me off quite as much. And this is happening in Congress. So a few weeks ago, she says, we had California Congresswoman Jackie Spear on the show. She told us her story of being sexually assaulted when she was a young congressional aide. She described how a powerful man in the office where she worked held her face, kissed her, and stuck his tongue in her mouth. And at that moment, she says, that's what Al Franken did to me. And that's what sort of brought it back. We've seen this going on in the European Parliament, sexual harassment, sexual assault allegations, and so on. Of course, Hollywood is coming out in the sports world. This is some really gross stuff. And I am the father of a daughter, so I take this stuff pretty goddamn seriously. So yeah, Al Franken forcibly kissed this woman without her consent, grabbed her breast while she was sleeping, and had a photo. How confident do you have to be? Here's me robbing the bank. Take a photo. Send it to the cops. I don't care. And this is what they're used to, this lack of accountability. This is what the media has bred and festered among the left. So we've got a photo of Al Franken playing rapey honk with a woman's boobs. And the left, the Dems are defending him. Oh, don't you have anything more interesting to talk about? La la. Now compare this to the almost 40-year-old, it's 1977, 40-year-old, somewhat legible inscription that Ray Moore is supposed to have scribbled into some woman's yearbook, which is proof of that. So Gloria Allred, inevitably defending one of these women, she calls into CNN. Wolf Blitzer, I still think he's an extra in a Castle Wolfenstein video game. Wolf Blitzer, live on the Situation Room. God, I hate that name. Everything's annoying me today. The Situation Room. No. You're in makeup. You're talking about news under bright lights. You're not the Pentagon. It's not a war zone. Full feet. So Allred called into CNN, and Wolf Blitzer said, "Okay, well, can you tell us for sure that there's nothing forged about this signature of Roy Moore?" And she says, well, I'll be willing to submit the yearbook to, quote, an independent expert or experts, end quote. But only once her client and Roy Moore have testified under oath before the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Select Committee on Ethics before the election, she says. Not going to agree to have the yearbook independently examined in any other situation or circumstance, claiming we're not going to be distracted. Distracted? This is a key piece of evidence that you're putting forward to smear a man's name from accusations from 40 years ago. And you're saying, well, I don't want to independently verify it because that would be a distraction. A distraction? You're holding it up as evidence. We should really verify that. It's a pretty strong allegation. No. Now, why does she want it in front of the Senate? Bullshit. For simple reasons, that it's bad optics. Oh, he's been dragged in front of a Senate investigation. Makes it look more important than it is. So she's just using this as leverage to get him in front of the Senate under oath. Let's ask, can you say flatly to our viewers right now, Gloria, that the signature, what he wrote in that yearbook in 1977, according to her, can you say flatly that it was not a forgery? Pretty simple question. Albert answered, well, all I'm saying is we will permit an independent examiner of the writing to look at exemplars of that former judge. We will allow all of this to be asked and answered at the hearing. Now he asks her again. He presses her on it. It's not a forgery, right? Not a forgery? This key piece of evidence, not a forgery, right? Pretty simple question. She says, well, all I'm saying is we're not denying, we're not admitting, we're not addressing. We will not be distracted and we will pursue a just result for our client. We're not admitting. Is it a forgery? I'm not going to tell you that. I think you just told us that. Good Lord. And this is what's going on. They say Roy Moore is unqualified to be in politics because he wrote something in a yearbook 40 years ago. That's proof. But Al Franken, it's not really that interesting. Doesn't really matter. My God. Now, this woman who's accusing Roy Moore, she said, well, I never dealt with him after that. Turns out, buzzer of falsehood came up. Turns out that Roy Moore, when he was a judge, adjudicated this woman's divorce in 1999. 1999. He assaulted me. But I'm perfectly happy having him as the judge in my divorce. Come on, people. I never had any contact with him again. Oh, well, no, I guess he was the judge in my divorce, but, who remembers that kind of stuff? Just another day in Chaos Land. It's so ridiculous and so horrendous. Moore should not be in politics because of a yearbook scribble from 40 years ago that's unverified. Oh, we have a picture of Al fucking Franken groping a woman while she's sleeping. That's different because I'm an addict to power and I'm a manipulator and a complete fucking dirtbag. If he was a frat boy, would he be expelled? How the hell did he even get elected? In Minnesota, by 300 odd votes. Any illegals voting in Minnesota? Well, sure. More than 14% of non-citizens in 2008 and the 2010 samples said that they were registered to vote. And some of those non-citizens actually voted, according to researchers. 6.4% of non-citizens voted in 2008 and 2.2% of non-citizens voted in 2010. That's enough to swing elections. Al Franken got in 2008 with 312 votes. Votes cast by 0.65% of Minnesota non-citizens would have accounted for that margin. Also, the flood of Somalians into Minnesota gave him the election, which gave you Obamacare. Why do you have Obamacare? Why are you forced into that? Because of massive third world importation of Somalians dumped into Minnesota. Very clear. Which you're forced to pay for in many cases through welfare as well. It's all part of the demographic coup of the Republic. So here we have a horrible situation wherein the left, who attacked a man on innuendo and accusation, is now, in many cases, defending a man when there's outright photographs of him groping a woman who is not conscious. Can she give consent? No! She's sleeping! What happens if you grope a woman without her consent? This is the male feminist. Oh, the GOP's got a war on women. God. If it weren't for hypocritical principles, the left would have no principles at all. And stop using our natural sympathy towards victims of sexual assault to gain political power. Stop using the virtues of your supposed enemies to undo them. But this is the natural escalation. Racist doesn't work anymore. You're a racist doesn't work anymore. Sexist doesn't work anymore. War on women doesn't work anymore. Homophobe, Islamophobe don't work anymore. Fake news got co-opted by people who actually speak truth to power, to the Democrat media academic industrial complex of power-seeking monkey brain addicts. Deplorables got co-opted and owned, adorable deplorables, and became a joke. Now, what happens if sexual assault doesn't work anymore? What happens? But this is why the left has got so lazy, because they've had the media shilling for them, they've had Hollywood shilling for them, they've had academia shilling for them, and they've had all of these, like they're like the mouthy, bratty little kid who's got this big, dangerous brother who's going to beat up anyone who. The bratty kid's like, oh yeah, and right, because he's got this big scary brother, and now the big scary brother is gone because there's the alternative media. In 2006, Al Franken could be comfortable with a woman having a picture of him groping her breasts while she's sleeping. This woman who just gave up her Christmas and 2 weeks of her life and endless amounts of sleep to do charitable work, he's groping her while she's sleeping. He's got no problem with her having this picture. Why? Because he knows the media is going to run defense for him. He knows it's never going to come out. Could he, of course, have anticipated that the alternative media, the honest media, the unbought media would run with this story and keep it alive more than 10 years down the road? Well, of course not. So maybe, just maybe, none of this attack people's reputation, destroy their source of income, drive them from public life, all of these satanic worshipping Saul Alinsky tactics of raw, monkey-brained, dopamine, power rush, political addiction grabbing, maybe that's not going to work anymore. Maybe if there's some control over immigration, stuffing the ballot with endless beating heart bodies of third world immigrants who are going to vote for the left from now to eternity, maybe that won't work either. Maybe, just maybe, without all of this support and protection and the big bully brother to make people run from the non-arguments, maybe the left just might start developing some actual goddamn arguments rather than bullying and manipulating and lying. But regardless of whether they do or whether they don't, here's my final message. People, do not have higher standards than your enemies. There's an old cartoon I remember reading when I was a kid. Some medieval battle, and the arrows are raining down on the knights. And one of them turns to the other and says, Arrows? Arrows? Well, can they do that? Well, if they develop arrows, you have to develop shields and arrows. Do not have higher standards than your enemies. Don't take this high road, glorious victory lap into the lava of inconsequentiality. Do not vanish with tired, higher standards into the ash heap of history. This is a battle. Peacefully, reasonably, but vociferously, energetically, and with commitment. Fight back.
Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. Check him out. Subscribe. Now, this double standard, it's really been evident in a lot of what's went on in D.C. for, generations. But through all that, you still see people that go, well, we can create a better government that's big. We want a socialist government. Well, what happens when people don't go along with your ideas? Well, we'll, send the police and military in. Well, that becomes communism and fascism, or, it becomes a dictatorship that way. And we're already been on that path long enough. But we aren't anywhere like Venezuela or North Korea or, the Soviet Union. But we definitely have slowly been on that path, and that's kind of their MO. do it nice and slow, and no one will, you know, make a big fuss about it. It's when you do major, you know, change that you create this bloody revolution, and in the middle of that bloody revolution, you create enemies and mistrust. Well, they figured out, hey, you know, do it real slow, and people won't really feel the changes right away. And then each generation that comes along will be so used to one way, so when we change it, it's not a big change. And then their kids will grow up with that change, and then we can slowly change it, and they'll accept the small changes. And you just keep doing that generation after generation. But the problem with that is people are so different. They're, even with the collective mentality, people react different, have different emotional reactions. You can find people that are pretty similar, but how many times do those two people interact, and how is two similar people going to interact with each other? You know, all these play a factor, and when you start getting more control and people start resisting, that's when the police state really steps in. And when you look at, you know, the whole Bundy, you know, situation, you see Black Lives Matter, Antifa, you know, all this, the more control they try to grab at a slow pace, the more that's going to grow, unless we take a step back. And I don't know within, you know, the powers to be right now, if they're willing or even knowledgeable on how to do that. Other than literally, probably, I can count them on one hand, how many people actually understand it and are trying to do something, whether they're libertarian, but they really do believe in small government. Give me a second here, sorry. Everything flipped out on me real quick. Okay. So we have this double standard. You have all these people coming out, and what really irritates me about the whole deal, it's not, you know, the double standard. We already know they're like that. We understand it. I think even people at home on the left that watch how they defend, you know, Al Franken, and they have, you know, Ben Affleck all over TV, you know, oh, he's going to speak out against it, and he's going to do his best. Well, you know, and then Al Franken, you know, it's just amazing to see it so blatant that even people on the left are going, okay, you know, what the hell, you know, screw him, he's the same as the others. But what really is kind of bugging me about everything is we all know that there are, you know, sex rings that are human trafficking, child trafficking, we know these are going on, and we're getting small potatoes. We have a photo of Al Franken, grabbing boobs. Okay, as bad as that is, why are we still not seeing the exposure of some of these big operations that entail a lot of these famous people? Well, because they're trying to, again, sacrificial lambs, and they're not even sacrificing them. They're pretending, they're doing a gesture of sacrifice. That's why they're trying to cover for Al Franken. That's why, they have Ben Affleck on TV. Double standard. I do want to get to this one I have from Reason.com, where we're kind of moving on here. But this one is titled, "Should the Government Get to Define Native American Art? One Woman's Free Speech Fight." It says here, Peggy Bonat has had a successful career as a Native American artist, working in beading, silver jewelry, and black and white photography. She won numerous awards at art shows and has shown her work at top-tier museums. Today, her career is in jeopardy because of a 2016 state law that says only members of federal recognized tribes can market their work as Native American or Indian made. Potawatomi is a part of the Potawatomi tribe, which is recognized only in the state of Virginia. Now she's suing the state on the grounds that the law violates her First Amendment rights. She called every state recognized tribe fake and illegitimate is just broad sweeping and wrong, but not told reason. Anastasia Bowden of the nonprofit Pacific Legal Foundation, which is representing Potawatomi, says the law is intended to restrict competition. She notes that State Representative Chuck Hoskin, Democrat, who sponsored the bill, has also served as the chief of staff for the federally recognized Cherokee Nation. The group certainly would have an interest in putting a law on the books that says that only federally recognized tribes can call themselves Native American, Bowden says. Representative Hoskin declined our interview request. Rebecca Tushnet, a Harvard law professor, says the Oklahoma law may have been poorly crafted but was well intentioned. She says fraud in the Native American art market is a big problem. Oklahoma isn't enforcing the law as the case is being deliberated, allowing Potawatomi to continue marketing her work as she always has. A decision is expected by the end of the year. Now, how one can the government decide, if I make something that is Native American related, I should be able to say, it's a Native American piece of art, not made by Native Americans, but it, you can word it, but maybe not be able, not made by Native Americans, but it's Native American art. If I have a picture of a Native American chief, in full, dress. That's Native American art. It's a descriptive term, and it kind of, I understand where they come from, but the problem is guess what? They're making fakes over in China and over in, a lot of countries other than America that they're making reproductions. And those are hitting the market. And they're actually trying to pass them off as Native American made. That's what you should focus on. But really, it's really up to the consumer. And there's plenty of professionals out there that would be able to tell you. Even someone that sells this stuff doesn't want to tend to buy this stuff if it's not real. I know a few places that I go for either currencies or gold, silver, or antiques, stuff like that. And he turns people down a lot because it's not real. Yeah, I could pass it off, but I'm not going to. But whatever, it's one of those deals. We'll see how this one turns out. The thing about this whole deal, she's actually Native American, but it's a state-recognized tribe, not a federally recognized tribe. Which federally recognized just means is a big enough tribe that we can, actually have to pay them or give them any type of, help. That's what that comes down to. Now, what time do we have here before I do this? Okay, we're good. I want to play this short clip here, as long as it'll pop up. Okay. Is Silicon Valley building the infrastructure for a police state? This from Reason 2. I'll play this clip. And they also have a clip covering that Native American one that you can go check out. You can find them on YouTube, Reason TV. Here we go.
Security is looking to increase its monitoring of Facebook and Twitter.
Something like Palantir is the key to stopping major terrorist attacks.
These are profile-based, automated, pre-crime, suspicion-generating mechanisms.
Precogs see the future, and they're never wrong.
I would compare artificial intelligence and machine learning to the advent of electricity.
It looks to us like a black box. The intelligence community is focused on getting intelligence wherever it can, by any means possible.
You're just told, sorry, you can't go there. You can't do that.
We all leave digital trails behind us as we journey through the world. And rapid advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning technology have allowed corporations and governments to build ever more precise tools to analyze that data, discover patterns, and even predict behavior.
I think one of the things that we're in the process of grappling with as society is, what does this technology mean? What does it do? I would compare artificial intelligence and machine learning to the advent of electricity. So imagine that you just heard about this magical thing called electricity, but there are bad things you can do with electricity. You can put people in an electric chair and use it for capital punishment. Those are things that we're going to have to work through with this technology. Is what are those concerns?
Some privacy experts, however, worry that handing this powerful technology over to opaque government agencies is laying the groundwork for a total police state.
The Berlin Wall wasn't actually built in a day. It was built quickly. But the checkpoints already existed. It's just that people were accustomed to passing from the American zone to the Soviet zone to the French zone. And what changed on the day was that all of a sudden the turnstile didn't lift. You weren't allowed through the checkpoint. Then the wall was built in. But in building the checkpoints, in building the control mechanisms, we're already putting in place the infrastructure for those who will abuse them in the future.
Some Silicon Valley companies have been building artificially intelligent surveillance tools for the deep state that help government agents make sense of massive amounts of information scattered across several databases and to discover patterns that might otherwise be hidden. They're called threat intelligence firms, and one of the biggest in the business is named Palantir.
One of the ways that people use the term threat intelligence is in terms of open source intelligence, gathering information about national security or other threats just by essentially reading the news, reading Twitter. Companies like Palantir can run artificial intelligences that can read a lot more of Twitter than any one person or even a team of people could possibly think of doing.
Palantir received an early $2 million investment from In-Q-Tel, the venture capital arm of the CIA. But Palantir's biggest early funder was PayPal founder, Facebook board member, and Trump supporter Peter Thiel, who invested $30 million in the company, which now has a $20 billion valuation.
Something like Palantir is the key to stopping major terrorist attacks. I don't think we're going to do it by projecting military force throughout the world. We will do it by uncovering these conspiracies before they come together.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
Journalist Mark Bowden reported in 2012 that the hunt for bin Laden drew on an unfathomably rich database. And after the government failed to parse the data on its own, Palantir developed a product that actually deserves the popular designation killer app. And Thiel, an outspoken libertarian, told Fortune magazine he hopes his technology will actually help protect the civil liberties of Americans. Because given the massive amounts of Americans' data the government takes in, if we could help them make sense of data, they could end indiscriminate surveillance.
We're not creating a technology that's this black box algorithmic engine that you just throw data into it and it spits out an answer to you.
But privacy experts worry that the secrecy around some of Palantir's contracts with the Department of Homeland Security are eroding civil liberties.
Palantir's tools, in their sophistication and complexity and their algorithmic rule sets, enable the transition from this watching role to a proactive, predictive policing role. They are the supposed precogs.
Precogs see the future, and they're never wrong.
But it's not the future if you stop it. Isn't that a fundamental paradox?
The movie Minority Report famously portrayed a society where police harnessed the power of psychic precogs to arrest people for crimes before they are ever actually committed. A 2012 Department of Homeland Security report boasts that Palantir's tech can be used to predict future activities.
So in moving down that path of pre-crime profiling, we're accepting that it is legitimate to impose consequences based on robotic precogs conclusions about what you're likely to do in the future.
So we say artificial intelligence, and we think about Skynet and HAL or 2001. A lot of times the actual technical reality is much more mundane and less exciting. We may be looking at things that are, for the AI, simply understanding what humans may intuitively get. If you drop a pen on the floor, you're likely to bend over and pick it up, right? Or types of predictions that might be in the aggregate, right? So for an aggregate population that undertakes certain behaviors, some percentage of them are likely to do X, Y, or Z.
The time is overdue to develop a new screening test for the threats we face today. I call it extreme vetting.
When the Trump administration talks about extreme vetting, the Palantir's tools and the decisions based on them are what they're talking about.
Palantir landed a major government contract in 2014 when the Obama administration approved a $41.6 million deal with Immigration and Customs Enforcement to set up an algorithmic profiling system.
How many government contracts do you currently hold today?
Most of our contracts have massive clauses in them saying we can't disclose.
The full extent of Palantir's federal contracts remains unknown, But under the Trump administration, the company has created a profiling system for Border Patrol, and a former Palantir lobbyist serves in the Pentagon as Deputy Chief of Staff to Defense Secretary James Mattis. Representatives from Palantir declined to participate in this video, but the company website assures visitors that there is oversight from Palantir's Council on Privacy and Civil Liberties.
Palantir is as opaque today as they were when they were founded. When other organizations have filed FOIA requests seeking information about it, they're almost uniformly denied. It looks to us like a black box, and without being inside Palantir, it's hard to say exactly how it works.
The Department of Homeland Security has only released highly redacted materials about these systems, arguing in court that the algorithms must stay secret in order to remain effective.
One of the challenges in a lot of intelligence work is that oftentimes the nature of the work is that if you explain publicly exactly what you're doing and how you're collecting information on whether it's terrorists or another government, you spoil that source of information.
When the government is telling judges whose role is to review and approve these things, trust us, but don't actually look at what we're doing, don't look behind the curtain, that should be a red flag that something wrong is going on behind the curtain and that we need to look more closely at it.
Enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country.
What we've seen since 9/11 is the emergence of a homeland security industrial complex that now rivals in its lobbying power and its influence in Washington, the military industrial complex. But I think the existence of a homeland security industrial complex as a force in Washington, regardless of which party is in power, has been largely unrecognized.
Because of the secrecy around the technology, it's hard to know to what degree the federal government has deployed it not only against immigrants and refugees, but against American citizens. We do know post 9/11 that information sharing between foreign intelligence agencies and domestic law enforcement has become routine.
Once these tools are built, the mission creep is extremely rapid. Once the NSA built a tool to try and find terrorists' phone calls, it was almost immediately used by DEA to find street-level drug criminals. If ICE builds a tool using Palantir technology, we can be certain that that tool will be used to whatever a government customer wants to do.
The real question is, what do we do with the technology, right? Who's using it, for what purposes, and under what kinds of safeguards? Particularly when we're talking with the government, what are the checks and balances in place? But there's no technology that is just inherently good or inherently bad. It's about how we're using it and to what ends.
I don't think it's inevitable that the government is going to adopt this kind of technology any more than it's inevitable that we're going to have a regime where you have to show your papers everywhere you go, or where there are virtual checkpoints everywhere and your facial image and its template is a virtual key that's vetted every time you walk down the street. The situation is bad. It's going to take significant change and significant popular resistance and pushback.
Now, we've warned about this for years. The surveillance state, the police state, NSA, CIA, the military-industrial complex, and the elites that their main goal is full-out control. And one thing that was brought up was during the San Bernardino shooting with the encrypted iPhone. Guess what? It popped up again. Yes, they're going after encryption once again. Lock Texas shooter's iPhone reignites encryption debate. Another one from Reason.com. Well, here we go again. The FBI has once more found itself locked out of the smartphone of a dead mass shooter. This time, Texas church massacre suspect Devin Kelly. Unless the feds find some kind of workaround to allow access without undermining the core encryption protections afforded by consumer devices. The incident could ignite another battle between the FBI and the tech community over the tensions between user security and law enforcement access. The issue is a tender one. In the spring of 2016, the FBI and Apple engaged in a fraught standoff over the encryption question following the 2015 terrorist attack at San Bernardino. The battle played out both in the public and the courts, with the FBI arguing that Apple had a duty to compel its engineers to intentionally break security features in order to access data on locked devices of deceased shooters Saeed Rizwan Farouk and Tashfeen Malik. Apple stood firm, refusing to compromise any of its devices and instead seeking to find alternative means to assist law enforcement. This intense showdown did not present a cathartic ending. The legal issues underpinning the debacle were never resolved in court. Rather, the brouhaha was rendered mute when an outside party swooped in to hack the phone for the FBI for a cool $900,000. The most recent shooting at a Texas church contains all the elements to create yet another battle royale between law enforcement and security professionals. The FBI agent in charge of the investigation, Christopher Combs, has already started grumbling about encryption, griping that law enforcement is increasingly not able to get into these phones. In an interview with Politico Pro, Department of Justice Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who has developed quite a reputation as an encryption critic, recently characterized the desire for strong, unbreakable encryption as unreasonable. The agency has confirmed that the device is an iPhone, but officials reportedly have yet to reach out to Apple for assistance, preferring instead to explore alternative means to access the phone's data, which they should. That's problematic. The iPhone security features are set up in such a way that the first 48 hours after an incident are critical. If the FBI had reached out to Apple within this time frame, the engineers could have assisted law enforcement to exploit the window of opportunities, but since the FBI neglected to reach out, they may have inadvertently filed their own options. For example, Apple's Touch ID feature allows individuals to unlock their device by scanning their fingerprint. If Kelly's iPhone had the Apple Touch ID feature enabled, law enforcement could have used the dead man's fingerprints to easily open the phone. That is, unless the device has been powered off and restarted, or 48 hours have passed, in which case the user's private passcode would be needed, and you can't exactly ask a dead man to tell you his passcode. If a feckless Android user like myself was one of the first in law enforcement to handle the device, they could easily seal off that route by immediately restarting the device. After all, it's a natural first step that frustrated smartphone users turn to when flummoxed by their technology, but in this case it could mean the difference between easy access to critical clues or a drawn-out legal battle that risks undermining the nation's data security. Even if they didn't turn off the phone or off the device, the critical 2-day window has coming on. One really hopes that the FBI did not allow pride or prejudice to prevent a simple request for Apple's assistant. Now, you can read the rest of that at reason.com. But the deal is, when everything you do is through your phone anymore, most people, they're using that Apple Pay. They have a lot of private information on these phones. You can't ask them not to encrypt it. You have to encrypt it. Otherwise, you put everybody's, livelihood at risk. All the features that make these phones so desirable would be completely undermined and useless. You wouldn't tie a credit card to that phone unless it had a $100 limit. You wouldn't ever tie your bank account to it. You wouldn't put private information in. If you break the encryption, if you have easy ways to break that encryption, they're not going to use those devices. And when you do have other devices where encryption could be written for these things, they don't need Apple to do it. It just happens that Apple already does it, so it's convenient. But you're not going to stop it. But it's that police state mentality that is really what's being argued. Should government have basically free access to your private information? They already get too much ability to abridge, the Fourth Amendment. There's already enough non-constitutional methods that law enforcement uses. And I'm not against, people that get in law enforcement want to, make their community better. I'm against the laws that they have to enforce. I'm against what they're used for. They're not peacekeepers anymore. More of your community where you police would be behind you if you were peacekeepers. But you're also trained to do things that don't ever help the situation out. The war on drugs, it's not helping. It doesn't do good. If anything, it's gotten worse. And you go after these low-level criminals, which is more of a profit-making venture. Another deal, you have pharmaceutical companies. Opioid epidemic, heroin epidemic that's going on right now. Because of the opioid epidemic, pharmaceutical companies. You're not kicking their doors down. What if the local law enforcement kicked down the door of, the CEO? It'd be all over the news for sure, but it's not going to happen. You're not going to be asked to do that if you're in law enforcement. Even though the pharmaceutical companies know exactly what they're doing. We can't play stupid to it. It's so out in the open, it's impossible to just play stupid to. Okay, we are coming up to the end broadcast. I want to play this real quick clip from We Are Change. Why we should be freaked out about Amazon. Al Franken investigates self. Quick overcap from We Are Change of what's topping in the news.
Human beings, and gosh darn it, there's so much news happening right now, it's hard to keep up with. But in this video, we're going to try to give you the most important things that are happening right now. And that's why in this video, we are going to be talking about the latest with Israel, the House of Saud salacious push for war with Iran, the new accused sexual abuser of the day with photos, mass online censorship of political ideas, and of course, the elimination and future enslavement of human society through technocratic economic warfare by companies like Amazon. Plus, a lot more. But first, let's start off with the latest geopolitical news, as a top Turkish parliament member came out today and warned the United States that Syria will become its second Vietnam, saying that the United States is trying to reshape the borders of the countries that were created after the First World War based on its own interests. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up right now is just minutes ago, Donald Trump tweeted and reinvigorated another push by the UN Security Council to once again go after Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and investigate him for committing war crimes. The United States is still playing an integral part in the Syrian civil war. According to U.S. generals, there's thousands of U.S. troops there right now, a conflict that they've been engaged in ever since it started, and now even admittedly through Amnesty International confirms how the U.S. and its ally Israel gave ISIS and other radical Islamic terrorist groups $1 billion of weapons, something we've been saying since the beginning of this civil war, but yet still hasn't reached mainstream media traction for some reason. And you would think funds raised through our taxes given to ISIS Islamic terrorists that now create more terrorism in the West would be a major news story, but for some reason it's still being ignored. And even with that, ISIS is still losing in Syria, and with that conflict almost over, there's another one brewing, with the push being made by mainly U.S. allies Saudi Arabia and Israel, who are working together trying to engage, of course, Hezbollah in Lebanon and its Iranian links, an important factor that the mainstream media ignores, especially with the factors that Israel, America's strongest ally, is ultimately getting ready for a major war. And if it wasn't clear for you enough, we now have the Israeli military chief coming out and backing cooperation against Iran with Saudi Arabia, where Israel is now even ready to share intelligence with Saudi Arabia against Iran ahead of a conflict that both works out in their greater geopolitical aspirations. And of course, there's a lot of tough talk coming from Israel, with their prime minister just coming out vowing that they will act alone against Iran if given no other option. Now, of course, that won't happen without the United States and Saudi Arabia's help, obviously, since Saudi Arabia is issuing similar statements, with their foreign minister coming out today, sending a message to Iran saying enough is enough. Now, of course, there is a lot of fear-mongering about this doom and gloom and upcoming war, but I do have to say there are a lot of economic factors that do contribute to people believing that this is not only going to be a war of words, especially with Saudi Arabia being strapped for cash and having a very dismal economic futures outlook, and the consequences of this greater potential war with Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Hezbollah, Lebanon are of course very grand and should be taken very seriously, with some economic experts predicting that this would cause oil to rise to $300 per barrel, and it would further impoverish the world. The toll on humanity would be grand, with of course Saudi Arabia not having any priority for human rights, as they just bombed another major airport in Yemen, preventing more humanitarian relief going to that country, as millions of people are already suffering and on the brink of death because of the proxy war that Saudi Arabia is involved in Yemen right now, supporting their previous government, the Sunni leadership, and Al-Qaeda, against the Iranian Houthi rebels. So the war between these two countries is already there in the proxy war of Yemen, and of course could expand to have a bigger global impact. With oil looking like it won't be the future for many Middle Eastern countries, we can only expect the Middle East to become more turbulent, more unpredictable, and something that soon will reach out and affect all of us. And for some reason, we're hearing very little about this on the mainstream media. But what we are hearing a lot about is, of course, some creepy dudes diddling some women, which is an important issue, but I think is definitely not being covered fairly at all. And one of the biggest revelations we found out through this diddling scandal that's happening in Hollywood and Washington, D.C. right now, and pretty much any upper echelons of society, is this statue in the U.S. government that needs to end immediately and has taxpayers bailing out sexual predators to the tune of $15 million within just the last decade to settle and silence sexual abuse victims of Congress members. These sick, degenerate plutocrats are literally getting a bailout, and with our money are using to silence their victims so no one hears about their indiscretions and illegal activities. Using similar practices as seen by Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein, by the way, who just threw a large sum of money legally make their victims sign contracts, pay them off, silence them so no one ever hears or knows about the true individuals that they are. An outright travesty to any justice, civility, and humanity. And when sexually harassing your aides and other employees in Washington, D.C. is not enough, we of course have the latest accusations against U.S. Senator Al Franken, where today a former Playboy model and broadcaster came out and accused him of kissing and groping her without consent, publishing this photo on social media and telling it all against the U.S. Senator. And in a bizarre twist, he actually admitted to it and is now calling for an ethics investigation on himself, which definitely should make for a very interesting investigation. And of course, the stories keep coming in from Washington, D.C. and Hollywood, as we're now learning that there's 20 more claims of inappropriate behavior against Kevin Spacey that took place over a decade at the Old Vic Theater. Sylvester Stallone is also being accused at the very moment of shooting this video. And again, just like we keep saying, this is only the beginning. We're seeing a lot of people trying to use these latest scandals politically, which of course is muddying the waters for everyone during this serious time. And while all the facts are still coming out about all of these cases, it's important to note that yes, there is a serious problem, probably a lot bigger one than we know of, especially with a lot of the mainstream media suppressing the bigger pedophile stories that have been happening. But the issues here shouldn't be about left and right, it should be about right and wrong, and not using a lot of these victims for political brownie points. But hey, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And now moving forward to other news, if you didn't know this, Twitter sucks and is being used as a political tool to try to censor and silence some of the voices of what people consider people on the right or far right, as Twitter just banned right-wing personality Baked Alaska and got rid of verification signs, taking away some of their privileges from right-wing personalities like Tommy Robinson. Now, personally, I do believe that there are a lot of dumb personalities on the left and right that I completely disagree with. But now, Twitter trying to be the political police and censoring one side is even dumber, and should be a reminder to everyone what we've been saying for years is that these big, mega technocratic companies cannot be trusted. They are not bastions of free speech. They are private corporations with political agendas that are only becoming more powerful and influential because of our compliance with them. And it's not just Twitter that sucks, it's also Facebook that just recently banned an account for posting an article with sources that were talking about false flag operations. Not any conspiracy theories, but admitted false flags like Operation Gladio, the Gulf of Tonkin, and other historically accurate false flag events, which for some reason Facebook has deemed too inappropriate for you to view and even understand. And we have to understand these big online tech companies not only pose a threat to free speech, but most importantly, almost everything else. As this article points out, especially with the development of quantum computing and AI, as this article points out, that artificial intelligence will of course serve humans, but of course only the 1% of them, highlighting a very serious issue facing the rest of humanity, because only the very powerful will have these latest technological advancements, which of course shouldn't be a surprise to you, will mainly be used against you for the benefit of the few people who own them. And I'm not trying to be sensational here, but I do see this as a very serious threat that a lot of people are not seeing coming at them. For example, look at Amazon, that now has 45,000 robots working for them that are replacing the human labor force, only enriching themselves and the very few, while at the same time the government allows it to happen by subsidizing these companies, not only giving them tax incentives, but also government grants, which pretty much takes our money and pays for our future economic enslavement. While local governments literally fight for Amazon to be located in their cities, where mainly robots will work and not human labor, by trying to entice them with just straight grant money or the incentives of not paying any tax, creating products that of course other governments buy for them, like right now where Amazon is selling its cloud business to China for up to $301 million. And with all that extra government cash, they're able to cut down prices of products that we need for our everyday life, like food, as Amazon just slashed Whole Foods prices in round 2 of their grocer wars. This is right just after Amazon bought Whole Foods. And while destroying independent competitors against them who don't have all the government money that they were given, they of course will use automation and be able to fire thousands of grocery store cashiers with of course their latest machines, while using privacy violating technologies like biometrics, creating a dependent control grid surveillance society, while working hand in hand with not only the Chinese government, the CIA, but also now the Pentagon, which is set to approve an Amazon deal that will give them $53 billion to supply the Pentagon with all of its needs. And with Amazon giving you the cheapest products, making shopping convenient for you, we all need to be slapped upside the head and realize that Amazon is a serious threat to not only our freedom, but also the free markets. And we have to understand a lot of the major power brokers like Jeff Bezos of Amazon and the political structures colluding with them will never warn you about the true dangers that they pose to our future society. And sadly, we may only realize the true problems that we are facing when it will be already too late to reverse the situation that we're in. And it already may be too late, as major investors are saying that Amazon stock should be the world's most valuable company, with huge, vast amount of wealth already being gobbled up by Jeff Bezos and other technocrats, and recent reports showing that how about 50% of global household wealth is now currently controlled by just 0.7% of the planet's population, and that only 36 million individuals own $128.7 trillion in the world, leaving, of course, a dwindling middle class and a staggering gap between the super rich and the super poor. And I wanted to end this story with a quote by Frank Zappa that said that the illusion of freedom will continue as long as it's profitable to continue the illusion. At the point where the illusion becomes too expensive to maintain, they will just take down the scenery, they will pull back the curtains, they will move the tables and chairs out of the way, and you will see the brick wall at the back of the theater. And I believe we're very close to that time, unless all of us wake up to this monster, monolithic mega corporation that could very well usher in an Orwellian technocratic state, as we're literally seeing it being built all around us. But the only thing standing in its way is our compliance. And if we stop using Amazon, if we stop using Twitter, if we stop using Facebook, if we stop enabling and empowering these technocrats, there's no way they would be able to continue without our compliance. Now, will that ever happen? I hope so. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't believe in it. I'm usually more optimistic, and sure, yeah, that will happen, because ultimately, on a very basic, simple hippie level, our thoughts create our own reality. If you know anyone who is not privy to this information and should hear this message, please share this video with them. Major thanks to all the individuals who donate $5 a month to wearechange.org to keep us fully free and independent. And most importantly, even though there's a lot of obstacles in our way, it's going to be okay. I think so. I hope so. It will be. I love you guys. Thank you again so much for watching.
We Are Change on YouTube, wearechange.org. Check them out, subscribe. Now, with AI gaining so much momentum and being used for so many things. Then you have warehouses that are being cleared of staff, but robots are doing the jobs. You will become, in some sort of way, a slave to the state. And then if this continues, there would almost have to be a calling, because you think that they're just going to have a whole bunch of robots just feed you and, pamper you and give you all kinds of free stuff without you ever doing anything? Do you think they're going to do that? No. Well, if you're not working, how are you making money? It's a really dicey game, because at the same time, if it becomes affordable, more people can take advantage of it. But then there's also becoming a limit of what type of advantage can be taken of it. But if we don't allow AI and robots to completely take over, and we use them for our personal benefit, so let's say you own the robot that is now doing your job. You lease that robot. That would make more sense. But that's not what's happening. And how far will this go and how fast? Well, if you have artificial intelligence making all the calculations and decisions, as long as it's programmed and working right, the quickness, the speed of development will increase dramatically. And that can become a real big problem for the human race. But there's a lot of optimism too, because I also see places refusing to accept that, saying that with all of what robots can do and the artificial intelligence can do, there's judgments that I know these people can make, that I'm still not convinced that those AIs will make those type of, judgments. And one big one's, moral judgments. Will AI have moral? I don't think that AI is capable of morals at this point. And whose morals? Whose set of morals? Thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget, check out ucy.tv. There's a lot to check out there. There's a support tab. Don't forget, you can donate to UCY, help keep this network going, and help pay for operating costs. And don't forget, My Patriot Supply, my choice for prep gear and non-GMO seed vaults. Anti-Tyrannynews.com/MyPatriot, and that helps contribute to operating costs on this. And thank you all again for tuning in tonight. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv. Great broadcast.